This is my story, told my way.
Hello, so today I'm going to be reviewing Velma, and at first I thought I could review a really in-depth review of this show, at least the first two episodes, but then I'm like, no, I really don't have the mental capacity to go in-depth about a show that no one really cares about, and it's a show that everyone universally hates and definitely probably doesn't need to be reviewed in depth. And a lot of things that you have heard about this show are absolutely true, and I'm probably going to be repeating a lot of the things that you've already heard. So, the moment this show starts, literally the third line of the show, I counted. I really counted. Literally, the third line of the show is dunking on my boy Fred. Now, Fred was not always my favorite character in the Scooby-Doo show, but I didn't really like hate him. Like I kind of liked Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, but I was never really a big fan of Fred, but I definitely would not wish for whatever happened to him in this show to happen to literally anyone or even on my worst enemies, because this show absolutely hates Fred. And literally at the beginning of the show, there's the infamous shower scene, and when I finally watched it, they didn't really show anything like there wasn't anything too explicit, but they did show the behind of the characters. Other than that, they didn't really show anything too much, which I'm glad they didn't, because you still have to realize that they are still teenagers and they're young adults, and that's still unacceptable, really. And you've already probably heard about the meta self-aware humor that this show has, and I don't know why writers think that if they can have the meta self-aware humor, they can get away with having a bad show. I mean, I'm just saying, and it's just a random thought, that if you have a really mediocre and bad show, and acknowledging that it's a bad show does not mean it's a good show. It's still a bad show, you're just acknowledging it. And this show definitely has that edgy humor that I would have found when I was like in my earlier teens or late teens, but I think that kind of humor is really redundant, and it's been done by a lot of shows and done, I might say, better than this show did. And there was also a scene where Velma's dad was photographing his naked pregnant girlfriend. I definitely found that really weird and awkward, but you know what, I guess I'll allow it. This is a weird edgy show for adults, so I guess it's fine. Maybe, I don't really know. You guys let me know in the comments down below if you guys found that scene to be a bit weird. And I want to say that Shaggy's character is not in this show. Like, there's Norville in this show, but I can't really in my good conscience call him Shaggy, because at least the other characters still have their names. But not only is Shaggy race swapped in this show, but his name is also changed, so I cannot in my good conscience call him the character of Shaggy, because it's like a completely different character. And you know what, credit where credit is due, there was actually one good joke in this show that actually made it laugh out loud, and that was when Fred throws like a board game or something, and it bounces and it cuts some guy's leg off, and I kind of laughed because I'm like a sucker for that kind of quick tempered humor or something. Like I like that, like I laughed out loud. Okay, so one thing where I have to defend this show, yes, I said the unthinkable thing, defend this show. There's a scene where a lot of people were talking about when Norville, not Shaggy, Norville was confessing his love to Velma, and she sort of laughs out loud and she's like, oh no way, you can't like me. And people were like really hating on Velma for that scene, but I think it's like a bit misunderstood, because when I watched it I read it completely differently, because when Norville was confessing his love to Velma, she laughs and she says that there's no way that you could like me. Like, she found that hilarious. Like, she, I think, felt really insecure about herself, that she thought that there is no way on this God's earth that someone like Norville could like her, or at least that's how I interpreted that scene. Let me know if you guys think I'm wrong or not, but yeah. And that's that, and I wanted to defend this because I didn't want to repeat what everyone else is saying, and I wanted to put my unbiased thoughts out there. And the first episode sort of ends with Fred getting arrested for the murder that happened at the starting of the episode, and this show sort of has a mystery building up, like who the villain is, and Velma has to be our main protagonist that is solving that mystery. But I think she kind of really sucks as a detective, because I have to like explain to you why she came to the conclusion why Fred is the killer. And I quote, her reasoning for thinking that Fred is the killer is he's a rich white boy with a tiny penis. Wow, and she's supposed to be the protagonist, that her main role is a mystery solver, and that is her reasoning for why someone killed someone. And I don't know but if you ask me, like, that's not a really good reason to accuse someone of a murder. Like, you have no evidence against that guy. And all the evidence that they had was very circumstantial evidence. Okay, so everyone has been talking about how this show really disses on Fred having a small boinker doinker, and it's actually really heavily mentioned a lot of times in the second episode, and I don't think it was even mentioned in the first one. Maybe it was hinted, but it's actually in the second episode where they really go heavy on my poor boy Fred's ding dong. So because Fred got arrested in the last episode, Velma kind of moves on from that whole mystery thing, and she wants to now focus on her missing mom, which is a thing in this show. And she asks Daphne to give her her mother's cold file, because Daphne's mothers are sort of in the police, and Daphne has access to those case files, and Daphne will give it to Velma for $500. But because Velma doesn't have $500, Velma has to do something for Daphne, and what could that be? Selling drugs, because Daphne sells drugs now. Great. Wow. Lovely. While all that is happening, Norville is on a side quest to get the $500 for Velma, because Velma needs money, and Norville wants to like woo Velma by giving her the money. So he takes his katana, he goes to the shop and to sell it, but he is not getting enough money for it. He gets out, and some guy sort of talks him into selling his kidney for like $500, and Norville's like, yep, sounds good, I'm going to sell my kidney to impress a girl. So on the other hand, Velma is still trying to sell drugs for Daphne, and she found someone to sell drugs in the park, and it turns out that it's her dad. And her dad is initially definitely angry that Velma is selling drugs, but then he agrees to give Velma $500 if Velma tries to help her father in the court to prove Fred's innocence. Because Velma's father is a lawyer and he's representing Fred, and just mentioning that because like I didn't mention it before, so mentioning it right now. And she tries to help her father, and her reason for believing Fred's innocence was just as hilarious as her reason for believing Fred was a culprit in the first place. And her reason for believing that Fred is innocent is because dun 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 that Fred is such a spoiled rich boy who doesn't even know how to eat food could not have possibly committed a murder. Sherlock's home can absolutely go to hell. Man, we have the best detective of our time, Velma. Absolutely a masterpiece. And the show ends with Velma and Daphne kissing one another. And this was a thing that the second episode started to build, which still felt really abrupt, but it was also a thing that the first episode didn't even hint it towards being an actual thing in this show. But in the second episode, like, they just sort of started to build towards it. It ended with Velma and Daphne kissing one another. And Norville watches all of that from a distance. And that's where the second episode sort of finishes. And a couple of thoughts that like when this show like really goes heavily on the small PP jokes, which I think it's just overdone and definitely not amusing anymore. Like this just goes like body shaming. You could not say to a woman that she's fat, but you can easily say that a guy has a small penis, and that's like the funniest thing ever. And I really hate that sort of double standard. Like you can joke about that kind of thing on a national television and make a show about it, and like people will not bat an eye towards it, and call a woman fat and you're like the most racist, bigoted, sexist person ever. And the comedy is definitely not something to write home about. And another thing that I didn't like about this show was the man hating part. In fact, any show that hates men just for being men, I don't like that part. Like that part is done. I don't like it. If any show has the part where men are hated just for being men, I don't like that show immediately. Like obviously I'm biased, as you can tell. I am a guy in fact, and obviously, like, I don't want to be hated just for being a guy, you know. And I think that's that for the review of the first two episodes. And if I have to rate it right now as the show is, I would have to rate it 35 out of 100. And I am rating that because, like, it's not the worst thing in the world. Like, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but I watch shows like this in my free time, so it's not like a huge shock to me. Like, I like watching bad animated shows, and this definitely falls into that category. And if this show wasn't an adaptation for a Scooby-Doo show, I would have watched a shows like this on Netflix and then completely forgot about it the next day. And I think that's exactly the problem with so many people. It's like they're taking a beloved property that's already exists and they're changing it so much just so that a lot of people can watch it, they can rage watch it, and it's probably going to get a lot of views. But I think this is a really bad strategy in the long run, because people will hate you for what you've done, and the internet sort of moves on really fast. Like, if you made a really bad show and people talk about it for one day, they're not going to be talking about for the next day. So this kind of their strategy of making a really bad show that will get people talking, yes, they will talk, but like today, tomorrow they're going to be talking about another thing, and your show is like fallen into the abyss, and it will be remembered as a really bad show that everyone watched and then forgot all about it. And now I'm going to rate this show again as a Scooby-Doo adaptation, and this gets a solid 5 because it's a really terrible adaptation. The only thing that it has going for it is the names of the characters, and for God's sake, it doesn't even have Scooby-Doo in it. And I think this is it for right now. If I see that there's another episode out there, I will definitely make a review about that, so look out for that. If you want more reviews about this, definitely subscribe or whatever, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.